Commander Thomas "Tom" Reynolds stood at the edge of the forward operating base in northeastern Afghanistan, squinting against the harsh morning sunlight. The mountains loomed in the distance, their jagged peaks cutting into the brilliant blue sky, like nature's own fortress. 3 days ago, those mountains had claimed the lives of 3 of his best scouts. 3 good men gone without warning, without even knowing what hit them. Reynolds ran his fingers along the scar that stretched from his right temple to his jawline, a souvenir from Fallujah back in 2004. The familiar ridge of tissue had become an unconscious habit whenever he faced a tactical problem he couldn't immediately solve. "Sir, the final ballistics report." Lieutenant Sofia Torres approached datapad in hand. Her face betrayed no emotion, but Reynolds knew her well enough to read the tension in her shoulders. "Tell me something I don't already know, Torres." The rounds recovered from all 3 victims match. 7. 62 to 50. Consistent with SVD Dragunov rifles, but the distance, she hesitated. "Spit it out, Lieutenant." "Based on trajectory analysis and bullet deformation, these shots came from between 1,200 and 1,400 meters, sir. Well beyond what typical Taliban marksmen are capable of. And the grouping was tight. All 3 shots within a 3-inch radius." Reynolds took the datapad, studying the detailed forensic analysis. "These aren't random pot shots from untrained fighters. This is professional work." "That's not all, sir. The timing between the shots suggests a single shooter. 3 kills in under 12 seconds at that distance." Reynolds felt the pit in his stomach deepen. In his 15 years with naval special warfare, he'd encountered enemy snipers before, but this level of precision spoke of something else entirely. Someone had sent a specialist into his area of operations. "Pull all recon teams back to within 800 meters of base. No solo movements. And get me everything we have on Russian or Chinese sniper activity in this region over the past 6 months." "Already done, sir. Colonel Harrison is sending additional intel. Should be here within the hour." Reynolds nodded, his eyes still fixed on the distant mountains. "Whoever's out there, they're playing a different game, and I need to know the rules before we lose anyone else." The armory buzzed with the usual afternoon activity. Weapons being cleaned, equipment checked, missions planned. Reynolds moved through the organized chaos with purpose, nodding to his men as he passed. These were among the most elite warriors the United States military had produced, each man a lethal combination of strength, skill, and tactical acumen. As he approached the rear of the armory, Reynolds noticed a figure working alone in the far corner. Something about the methodical movements caught his attention. The person was hunched over what appeared to be a Barrett M82A1 sniper rifle, handling the massive weapon with a precision that seemed almost reverent. Reynolds paused, watching. The way this person dismantled and reassembled the firing pin assembly wasn't standard military procedure. It was more efficient, more precise. The hands moved with the confidence of someone who had performed this operation countless times under conditions where failure wasn't an option. He moved closer, curiosity overtaking protocol. From the smaller frame, he could now tell it was a woman. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, regulation perfect. As she tilted her head to examine the barrel, Reynolds noticed her profile. Sharp jawline, focused eyes, completely absorbed in her task. She was making adjustments to the scope mount that Reynolds had never seen before, miniature tools working on components that most armorers wouldn't even attempt to modify. The woman suddenly stopped, her hands becoming still. Without turning, she spoke. "Commander Reynolds, I presume?" Her voice was steady, professional, with no hint of surprise at being observed. She continued working as she spoke. "Staff Sergeant Alexandra Morgan. JSOC sent me this morning. I was told to report directly to you after getting my equipment in order. Reynolds hadn't been notified about any JSOC personnel joining his operation. That wasn't unusual in itself. Joint Special Operations Command often inserted specialists with minimal notice, especially when the situation demanded immediate expertise. JSOC. Huh, funny. I don't recall requesting additional personnel. You didn't, sir. Colonel Harrison did. Morgan finally turned to face him, setting aside a specialized tool. Her eyes were gray, assessing him with a directness that most subordinates avoided with commanding officers. And what exactly did Harrison think we needed? Morgan gestured to the Barrett. You have a long-range problem, Commander. I'm your long-range solution. Reynolds crossed his arms. You're a sniper. I specialize in extreme-range precision engagement, sir. The careful choice of words wasn't lost on Reynolds. Extreme range suggested capabilities beyond standard military sniper qualifications. How extreme are we talking, Sergeant? Effective engagement beyond 2,000 meters depending on conditions. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. 2,000 meters was well beyond what most military snipers considered reliable killing range. Even with the best equipment, atmospheric conditions, wind variations, and Earth's curvature made such shots more theoretical than practical in actual combat situations. That's quite a claim. It's not a claim, sir. It's a mission parameter. Morgan turned back to the Barrett, making a final adjustment to the scope before reassembling the weapon with fluid efficiency. I understand you've lost 3 men to an enemy sniper operating at ranges your team isn't equipped to counter. The directness caught Reynolds slightly off guard. Information about their losses shouldn't have reached JSOC channels this quickly. You seem well informed, Sergeant. That's my job, Commander. To know what I'm facing before I face it. She locked the Barrett's bolt into place with a decisive click. I'll need detailed meteorological data for the past week's satellite imagery of the Eastern Ridge systems and access to your best spotter if available. Reynolds studied her for a moment. There was no bravado in her requests, no attempt to impress, just a professional outlining what she needed to perform her mission. You'll be integrated into our operation gradually, Sergeant. I don't throw specialists into the field without proper assessment, regardless of who sent them. With respect, sir, every day we delay gives the enemy sniper more opportunities. Time isn't a luxury your men can afford right now. The comment might have seemed insubordinate from another soldier, but Morgan delivered it as simple tactical assessment. Reynolds noticed several of his team members had paused their activities, watching the exchange with undisguised interest. The presence of a female sniper, especially one claiming extreme range capabilities, had already captured their attention. My office. 10 minutes. Reynolds turned to leave, then paused. And bring your service record. The unredacted version, if such a thing exists. Morgan nodded once, returning to her methodical weapon preparation without another word. As Reynolds walked away, he heard one of his senior team members mutter to another, "A female long-range specialist. This should be interesting." Reynolds didn't turn around, but he made a mental note of the speaker. Preconceptions and biases had no place in special operations where performance was the only metric that mattered. Still, he understood the skepticism. The community was small and reputations traveled fast. If Morgan truly possessed the capabilities she claimed, Reynolds would have heard her name before. The fact that he hadn't told him 2 things either, her reputation was exaggerated, or her operations had been classified to a level beyond his considerable security clearance. Neither option made him entirely comfortable. Reynolds sat behind his desk, reviewing the sparse file that had accompanied Staff Sergeant Morgan's arrival. The document contained the standard biographical information, qualification records, and deployment history. But the details were suspiciously thin, with numerous sections marked classified or need-to-know basis only. Even with his clearance level, Reynolds couldn't access her full operational history. A knock at the door interrupted his reading. "Enter." Morgan stepped into the office, a thin folder tucked under her arm. She stood at attention, military bearing impeccable. "At ease, Sergeant. Have a seat." She sat across from him, placing the folder on his desk. "My service record, sir. What's available of it?" Reynolds opened the folder. The documents inside weren't much more revealing than what he already had. Basic training at Fort Benning, advanced marksmanship qualifications, several deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. Nothing that explained the exceptional skill he'd witnessed in the armory. "This tells me where you've been, Sergeant, but not what you can do. What I can do is best demonstrated in the field commander." "Humor me." Reynolds leaned back in his chair. "Your file says you've been with JSOC for 4 years, but there's almost nothing about your operations during that time. No commendations, no mission reports, nothing that would explain why Harrison would send you specifically to address our situation." Morgan maintained eye contact. "Most of my work falls under special access programs, sir. The documentation exists, just not in formats available to field commanders. Even those with top-secret clearance. Especially those with standard clearances, sir. No offense intended." Reynolds studied her. Morgan's confidence wasn't arrogance. It was the quiet certainty of someone who knew precisely what they were capable of and had nothing to prove. "Tell me about the modifications you were making to that Barrett." A flicker of interest crossed her face. "Custom adjustments to the scope mounting system. Reduces vibration transmission between the rifle body and the optics. Critical for extreme range shots, where even microscopic movement translates to meters of deviation at the target." "You designed these modifications yourself?" "Yes, sir. Along with custom load specifications for the .50 caliber ammunition. Standard military issue is excellent for typical engagement distances, but beyond 1,500 meters, you need rounds specifically balanced for your weapon's harmonics." Reynolds nodded. The technical knowledge was impressive, and more importantly practical, rather than theoretical. This wasn't information memorized from manuals. "What's your assessment of our current situation based on what you know?" Morgan's expression became more focused. "You're facing a specialist, sir. Someone with training comparable to Western military standards, but operating with different tactical objectives. The positioning of the shots, the timing, the target selection, all suggest this isn't just about eliminating American personnel. It's about psychological impact, creating uncertainty, restricting your operational mobility. And you believe you can counter this threat?" "I know I can, sir. But I'll need to establish observation positions above the typical patrol routes, preferably within the next 12 hours. Dawn positioning would be optimal." The secure phone on Reynolds's desk rang, interrupting their conversation. He checked the caller ID and raised an eyebrow. "Speak of the devil," he answered, putting the call on speaker. "Colonel Harrison, we were just discussing your gift package." The gravelly voice of Colonel William Harrison filled the room. "Reynolds, I see Sergeant Morgan has arrived. Has she briefed you on her capabilities?" "We're getting there, sir, though I'm curious why I wasn't notified before her arrival." "Operational security. Morgan's assignment to your AO is classified above standard protocols, but given your situation, I made an executive decision. You need her skills." Reynolds glanced at Morgan, who remained impassive. "The enemy sniper. That's just the beginning. Intelligence suggests you're dealing with something bigger. I'm sending Master Sergeant Sullivan to provide additional context." Reynolds straightened in his chair. "James Sullivan? I thought he retired after the Gulf." "Semi-retired. He still consults on special projects. He specifically requested to join this operation when he heard about Morgan's deployment. Reynolds noticed Morgan's subtle reaction at the mention of Sullivan's name. A slight tightening around the eyes, almost imperceptible. "Any particular reason, sir?" "Sullivan has history with this type of situation. He'll fill you in when he arrives tomorrow morning. In the meantime, give Morgan whatever she needs. She's not exaggerating her capabilities, Reynolds. I've seen her work." "Understood, sir." "One more thing. The shots that took out your men weren't random. Initial analysis suggests they were ranging shots. Testing your response protocols, identifying your patterns. Whoever's out there is preparing for something bigger." The call ended, leaving Reynolds with more questions than answers. He turned his attention back to Morgan, whose expression had returned to professional neutrality. "You know Sullivan." It wasn't a question. Morgan hesitated before answering. "We've crossed paths, sir." "Care to elaborate?" "Master Sergeant Sullivan was involved in some of my early training, before JSOC." Reynolds sensed there was considerably more to the story, but Morgan's tone made it clear she wouldn't volunteer additional information. "All right, Sergeant. You've got 12 hours to prove your worth. I'll assign Lieutenant Torres as your liaison. She knows the terrain better than anyone on base. Get what you need from supply, but keep a low profile. I don't want the enemy knowing we've changed our game until we're ready to make a move." "Understood, sir. Thank you." As Morgan stood to leave, Reynolds had one final question. "The modifications you were making to that Barrett, how much difference do they actually make at extreme range?" For the first time, Morgan showed a hint of a smile. "The difference between hitting your target and missing by meters, sir. In my line of work, there's no such thing as almost." Word of Morgan's arrival spread quickly through the base. By evening, she had become the subject of intense speculation among the special operations teams. Reynolds watched from a distance as she methodically prepared her equipment, ignoring the occasional skeptical glances from some of his men. Lieutenant Torres had taken to her assignment with professional curiosity, helping Morgan access the meteorological data and terrain maps she'd requested. The two women worked efficiently together, a partnership based on mutual respect rather than gender solidarity. "What do you make of her?" Reynolds asked Torres during a brief moment alone. Torres considered the question carefully. "She knows her stuff, sir. The questions she asks about wind patterns and terrain features are exactly what an expert would focus on. And she's been studying satellite imagery of the eastern valleys with a level of attention I've never seen. She's identified potential firing positions that weren't in any of our threat assessments. But can she deliver on her claims? I wouldn't bet against her commander. There's something about the way she handles herself, like someone who's been tested and never found wanting." Reynolds nodded, trusting Torres's judgment. As one of the few female officers in their special operations community, Torres had developed an uncanny ability to assess people without being influenced by the usual biases. "Keep me posted. If Morgan is as good as Harrison claims, she might be the edge we need right now." The following morning arrived with the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors cutting through the pre-dawn air. Reynolds was already awake, reviewing the night's intelligence reports, when the call came through that Master Sergeant James Sullivan had arrived. Reynolds made his way to the landing pad, curious about the man whose reputation had achieved near-mythical status among special operations veterans. Sullivan had been part of the elite sniper communities since the early days of the Gulf War, pioneering techniques that had become standard training for modern military marksmen. The helicopter's rotors slowed as Reynolds approached. From the open door emerged a lean figure that moved with the deliberate economy of a lifelong operator. James Sullivan stood 6 feet tall, his frame wiry rather than bulky. At 63, his close-cropped hair had gone completely gray, contrasting with deeply tanned skin weathered by decades in harsh environments. But it was Sullivan's eyes that commanded attention, sharp, assessing, missing nothing. "Commander Reynolds?" Sullivan extended a hand, his grip firm. "Appreciate the welcome." "Master Sergeant, it's an honor. Your reputation precedes you." Sullivan offered a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Most of that reputation is exaggerated. The parts that aren't well, those are classified until I'm dead." Reynolds led Sullivan toward the command center. "Colonel Harrison says you have insight into our current situation." "Some." Sullivan scanned the base as they walked, his gaze lingering on the distant mountains. "But first, I understand Sergeant Morgan is here. Arrived yesterday, currently prepping for an observation mission." Sullivan nodded, as if confirming something he already knew. "I'd like to see her before we brief." Reynolds led Sullivan to the Tactical Operations Center, where Morgan was reviewing final satellite imagery with Torres. When Morgan looked up and saw Sullivan, Reynolds noticed an immediate change in her demeanor. The professional detachment she'd maintained since arrival softened slightly, revealing a complex mix of respect and something deeper. "Master Sergeant Sullivan." Morgan stood, her posture automatically shifting to attention, despite the informal setting. "At ease, Morgan." Sullivan approached, his eyes taking in the tactical display and equipment with a quick, practiced assessment. "Still favoring the Barrett, I see. Best tool for the job, Master Sergeant." Sullivan picked up one of Morgan's custom ammunition rounds, examining it with expert precision. "You've modified the boat tail angle. Interesting choice. Reduces drag coefficient by approximately 4% at extreme range. Makes a difference beyond 2,000 meters." Sullivan nodded approvingly. "Always did have an eye for the details others miss." Reynolds watched the exchange with interest. There was clearly history between them, a rapport that went beyond casual professional acquaintance. "I take it you two have worked together before?" Reynolds observed. Sullivan replaced the round carefully. "You could say that. Morgan was one of my students years back, before she disappeared into the classified world." "Master Sergeant Sullivan was the lead instructor for advanced long-range marksmanship when I came through the program," Morgan added, offering no further explanation. Sullivan turned his attention to the terrain map displayed on the screen. "I see you've been studying the eastern approaches. Found anything interesting?" "Multiple potential firing positions with sight lines to our patrol routes. Based on the ballistic evidence, I've narrowed the most likely position to this ridgeline." Morgan pointed to a rocky outcropping approximately 1,400 meters from where the 3 scouts had been killed. Sullivan studied the location, then shook his head. "Too obvious. Your shooter wouldn't use such an exposed position. And it's not exposed if you approach from the northeastern face. There's a natural depression that provides concealment from aerial surveillance." Sullivan looked closer, a hint of surprise crossing his features. "You're right. Good catch." He turned to Reynolds. "You've got a genuine expert here, Commander." Before Reynolds could respond, Sullivan's attention shifted to another area of the map. "What about this valley, the Korengal?" Morgan tensed almost imperceptibly. "Complex terrain. Multiple engagement angles, but difficult exfiltration options." "Had some action there back in 2009, Sullivan said, his voice taking on a storyteller's cadence. "Operation Hammer Strike. We were pinned down Taliban fighters on 3 sides. No air support due to weather. Worst situation I've been in." Reynolds nodded, familiar with the infamous operation that had nearly ended in disaster. "What saved us was something no one expected." Sullivan continued, his eyes leaving Morgan's face. "A single sniper position unknown started taking out the Taliban leadership. 1 shot, 1 kill. Precise. methodical, at ranges that shouldn't have been possible under those conditions. 7 confirmed kills at distances beyond 2,000 meters. Military sniper, Reynolds asked. That's the thing. No record of any American sniper operating in that sector. No official acknowledgement of the support. Just 7 perfect shots that saved 20 American lives, including mine. Sullivan finally broke his gaze from Morgan. Never did find out who was behind that rifle. But whoever it was, they had skills I've seen in only one other person. The implication hung in the air. Morgan maintained a neutral expression, but Reynolds caught the silent communication passing between her and Sullivan. A shared secret acknowledged, but not spoken aloud. Sullivan changed the subject abruptly. Commander, I believe we need to discuss the current threat assessment in private. If you have a secure location, Reynolds nodded, intrigued by the exchange he'd just witnessed. My office. Lieutenant Torres, continue preparation for the observation mission. Sergeant Morgan, join us when you've finished your equipment check. As they walked to his office, Reynolds couldn't help but ask, was that Morgan in the Korengal? Sullivan's expression remained carefully neutral. Official records show no female snipers operating in that region during that time frame. That's not an answer, Master Sergeant. It's the only answer you're cleared to receive, Commander. Sullivan's tone made it clear the subject was closed. What matters now is that you understand the caliber of specialist you've been sent. Morgan isn't just another sniper. She's something else entirely. Reynolds' office door closed behind them, sealing them in a bubble of relative privacy. Sullivan declined the offered chair instead, moving to the window that overlooked the mountains dominating the horizon. What Colonel Harrison told you is just the tip of the iceberg. Sullivan began, his voice low, despite the security of their location. The sniper targeting your men isn't a random Taliban fighter who got lucky. Intelligence suggests we're dealing with a Russian program codenamed Siberia. Reynolds leaned against his desk. Russian involvement here wouldn't be unprecedented. This isn't about typical Russian interference. Siberia is a specialized training program run by a former Spetsnaz operator named Anton Volkov. He selects and trains snipers specifically for psychological warfare operations in contested territories. You seem to know a lot about this Volkov. Sullivan's expression darkened. We've crossed paths. During the latter part of the Cold War, and again in Panama in '89, he's a true believer in the old Soviet ideology, even after the fall. Spent years developing a specialized sniper program that combines traditional Russian marksmanship with modern technology. And now he's operating in our AO, not directly. Volkov doesn't pull triggers anymore. He trains others. The evidence suggests he's using Afghanistan as a proving ground for his latest generation of specialists. Your men were killed as part of their qualification process. The revelation hit Reynolds like a physical blow. You're telling me my scouts died so some Russian sniper could earn a passing grade? That's exactly what I'm saying. And it's going to get worse. Volkov's program isn't just about creating snipers. It's about developing psychological warfare specialists who use extreme range precision as their primary tool. The goal is to create uncertainty, paralyze operations, and demonstrate Russian capability without direct attribution. Reynolds processed this information, the tactical implications immediately clear. How do we counter this? That's where Morgan comes in. Sullivan turned from the window. She's not just good, Reynolds. She's the best I've ever seen. Beyond anything we officially acknowledge in terms of capability. You trained her. Sullivan's expression softened slightly. I recognized her potential, guided it. But what she's become is something beyond normal training parameters. There are shots she's made that defy conventional understanding of what's possible. A knock at the door interrupted them. Morgan entered at Reynolds's acknowledgement, her equipment preparation evidently complete. Sergeant Morgan, Master Sergeant Sullivan, was just explaining our opposition. Reynolds gestured for her to join them. A Russian named Volkov, running a specialized sniper training program. Morgan's reaction was subtle, but unmistakable. A slight narrowing of the eyes, a barely perceptible tension in her posture. "You know the name," Sullivan observed. "By reputation only." Morgan's response came too quickly to be entirely truthful. Sullivan didn't press the point. Instead, he turned back to Reynolds. "What Morgan needs is authorization to establish an observation position with direct sight lines to the most likely enemy locations. Based on pattern analysis, they'll attempt another qualification shot within the next 48 hours. "And if we locate the shooter?" Reynolds asked. "We eliminate the immediate threat," Morgan said, her voice matter-of-fact. "But more importantly, we gather intelligence on their equipment techniques and communication protocols. That information could help identify the entire Siberia operation network." Reynolds considered the proposal. The risk was substantial, placing operators in exposed positions against a demonstrated lethal threat. But the potential intelligence value was equally significant. "Lieutenant Torres has identified 3 potential observation posts with overlapping fields of view," Morgan continued. "We can establish position before dawn, minimizing the chance of detection." Reynolds questioned. "I'll need a spotter, someone familiar with the terrain and local conditions." Sullivan interjected. "I'll accompany Sergeant Morgan. My experience with Volkov's operational patterns will be valuable in identifying potential threat positions." Reynolds hadn't expected Sullivan to volunteer for field operations given his age and advisory status. The offer emphasized the seriousness of the situation. "Very well. Establish your OP at location Alpha as proposed. Maintain communication silence unless you confirm enemy presence. Extraction team will be on standby at the base, ready to move on your signal." "Thank you, sir." Morgan's expression remained professional, but Reynolds caught a glimpse of something else. Anticipation, perhaps. The focus of a specialist finally allowed to apply their craft. As Morgan left to finalize preparations, Sullivan lingered. "There's something else you should know about Morgan," he said once they were alone again. "Her involvement in this isn't just professional. It's personal." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "I can't give you details, but understand that Morgan and Volkov's paths have crossed before indirectly. The outcome wasn't favorable for Volkov's side. If he discovers she's here, he'll change the parameters of his operation specifically to target her." "Are you suggesting Sergeant Morgan has a conflict of interest that might compromise this mission?" Sullivan shook his head. "Quite the opposite. I'm telling you that her motivation goes beyond duty. It's about setting right something from the past. That makes her more focused, not less. But it also makes her a high-value target if identified." "Why tell me this and not provide details?" "Because you need to understand what you're working with. Morgan isn't just another specialist temporarily attached to your command. She's a weapon specifically designed for this exact type of threat. But like any precision tool, her effectiveness depends on proper deployment." Reynolds considered Sullivan's words carefully. "And you believe you're the one who knows how to deploy her effectively." "I know her capabilities better than anyone, Commander. I've seen what she can do when the conditions are right." Sullivan moved toward the door. "And what we're facing will require everything she's capable of, and perhaps more." The pre-dawn darkness enveloped the landscape as Morgan and Sullivan made their final approach to the observation post. They had left the base 3 hours earlier, moving with the practiced stealth of seasoned operators. Neither had spoken much during the journey, communicating primarily through hand signals and occasional whispered coordinates. Their chosen position was a natural depression in the rocky terrain, offering both concealment and clear sight lines to the valleys below, where the enemy sniper was most likely to operate. Morgan moved with efficient precision, setting up her Barrett M82A1 on a stable firing platform, while Sullivan established the spotting position with his high-powered optics. The familiar routine of preparation created a rhythm between them two professionals who had performed these actions countless times in environments far more hostile than this. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky with faint purple light, Morgan completed her weapon setup and began the meticulous process of calculating initial ballistic solutions based on the current conditions. Sullivan observed her work with quiet approval. "Your form has improved. More efficient now." Morgan acknowledged the comment with a slight nod, continuing her preparations. "Better equipment helps." "It's not the equipment." Sullivan adjusted his spotting scope, scanning the distant ridgelines. "You've developed a system, personalized approach to the variables." "I had a good teacher." The simple statement hung between them, carrying weight beyond the words themselves. Sullivan allowed himself a brief smile before returning to his professional demeanor. "Initial weather conditions are favorable. Wind at 3 knots from the northeast. Humidity at 30%. Temperature rising but stable for the next 2 hours." Morgan recorded the data, incorporating it into her calculations. Range to primary target area: 1,640 meters to the northern ridge. 1,820 to the eastern approach. The distances were substantial, but well within Morgan's operational parameters. She made final adjustments to her scope, confirming the settings with practiced precision. "So, Korengal Valley," Morgan said after a long silence, her eyes never leaving her scope. "Interesting story." Sullivan continued scanning the horizon. "True story. Some might question the details, official records and all that. History is written by those with the security clearance to write it." Sullivan shifted his position slightly. "Some of the best operations never make it into any record." Morgan allowed herself the smallest smile. "Convenient for maintaining certain narratives. Necessary for protecting certain assets." Sullivan's tone became more serious. "Like exceptional snipers who were operating in classified capacities before their official military careers began." The conversation approached dangerous territory, information that existed in the shadows between official records and operational reality. Those exceptional assets might appreciate the discretion of their former instructors, Morgan replied carefully, "especially when current operations require focus on the present rather than the past." Sullivan nodded, understanding the boundaries being established. "Movement northeast ridgeline approximately 1,700 meters. 2 figures moving tactically." Morgan shifted her attention immediately, her scope finding the location Sullivan had identified. Through the advanced optics, she could make out 2 figures establishing what appeared to be a firing position on the rocky outcropping. "Confirmed. Military bearing using proper terrain masking techniques, not typical insurgent behavior." Sullivan studied the figures through his spotting scope. "Equipment profile suggests specialized operators. One appears to be instructing the other." "Volkov's training program," Morgan whispered. "We're watching a live lesson." They observed in silence as the 2 distant figures meticulously established their position. The methodical nature of their movements confirmed Sullivan's assessment. These weren't random fighters, but highly trained specialists following established protocols. Primary subject is setting up what appears to be an SVD Dragunov with custom modifications. Sullivan reported his experienced eye picking out details despite the distance. Secondary subject is observing, likely a trainee. Morgan adjusted her own optics, focusing on the rifle. "Modified stock, and what looks like a custom optic system, consistent with Siberia program specifications. Sullivan glanced at her curiosity evident. "You're familiar with their equipment configurations." "Intelligence briefings," Morgan replied too quickly to be entirely truthful. Before Sullivan could pursue the question, the situation below changed. "They're preparing for a shot. Instructor is providing final guidance." Morgan tracked their sightline, calculating the probable target area. "They're aiming toward the Western Patrol route. Our team is scheduled to move through that sector in approximately 30 minutes. "Another qualification shot," Sullivan confirmed grimly. "We need to neutralize them before they can engage." "Holding for authorization," Morgan replied, her training asserting itself over the immediate tactical urge to eliminate the threat. Sullivan reached for the secure radio. "Sierra Actual, this is Overwatch. We have confirmed hostile sniper team preparing to engage friendly forces. Request immediate authorization to neutralize threat." Reynolds's voice came through clearly. "Overwatch Sierra Actual. Confirm hostile intent and weapons." Sierra Actual hostiles are equipped with SVD Dragunov rifles established in firing position with direct sightline to Western Patrol route. Clear hostile intent. "Overwatch, you have authorization to engage. Protect our people." Sullivan turned to Morgan. "You have the green light. Primary target is the instructor. Secondary is the trainee." Morgan had already calculated the firing solution, accounting for distance, wind temperature, and the slight curvature of the Earth at this range. Her breathing slowed, heart rate decreasing as she entered the state of focused calm that characterized elite snipers. Range to target 1,740 meters, adjusting for environmental factors. Solution confirmed. Sullivan watched as Morgan made minute adjustments to her scope. "Whenever you're ready, take the shot." Morgan's finger took up the first pressure on the trigger, her entire being focused through the scope at the distant figure who represented both an immediate threat and part of a larger, more insidious operation. The Barrett's crosshairs settled on the instructor's center mass. "Sending it," she whispered, completing the trigger pull with perfect technique. The Barrett roared, its massive recoil absorbed by Morgan's positioning and the weapon's compensating systems. Through her scope, she tracked the impact, already adjusting for the second shot, before Sullivan could provide confirmation. "Direct hit! Primary target down!" Sullivan's voice carried professional satisfaction. "Second subject is reacting, attempting to locate our position." Morgan had already reacquired the secondary target, who was now moving erratically, seeking cover. The increased difficulty of hitting a moving target at this range would have deterred most snipers. Morgan simply adjusted her calculation, leading the target with practiced precision. "Second shot on the way." The Barrett thundered again. "Impact! Clean shot, center mass." Sullivan continued watching through his scope. Both targets neutralized. No apparent movement. Morgan maintained her position, scanning for any additional threats or signs of counterfire. "Area appears clear. No additional hostile presence detected." Sullivan keyed the radio. "Sierra Actual Overwatch. Threats neutralized. 2 enemy personnel confirmed eliminated. Area currently secure. Overwatch well done. Maintain position. Reconnaissance team deploying to examine enemy location and collect intelligence. ETA 30 minutes. As they settled in to maintain overwatch for the approaching reconnaissance team, Sullivan studied Morgan with newfound appreciation. 2 shots, 2 kills, moving target at 1,700+ meters. That's exceptional work under field conditions. Morgan began the process of recording the engagement details in her small weatherproof notebook, a personal habit rather than official procedure. Favorable conditions, minimal wind, good visibility. Don't downplay it. I've known maybe 3 people in my entire career who could make those shots consistently. Morgan finally looked up from her notes, meeting Sullivan's gaze directly. You could have made them. Once, perhaps. Years ago. Sullivan smiled slightly. Now I'm content to watch the next generation exceed what we thought possible. As they waited for the reconnaissance team to reach the neutralized enemy position, Sullivan noticed Morgan absently touching something beneath her tactical vest. A small motion, probably unconscious. "Still have it, don't you?" he asked quietly. Morgan's hand stilled. After a moment's hesitation, she pulled out a thin chain from beneath her collar. Hanging from it was a tarnished brass compass, old and worn, but clearly maintained with care. "Never go into the field without it," she admitted quickly, tucking it back out of sight. Sullivan nodded, understanding the significance of the item without requiring explanation. Some totems carried meaning beyond their physical presence. For operators like them, such objects often connected present missions with formative past experiences. "The reconnaissance team has reached the target location," Morgan reported, changing the subject, as she observed through her scope. "They're securing the area and examining the equipment." Sullivan returned his attention to the mission at hand. "Let's hope they find something that helps us understand the full scope of what we're dealing with." As they watched the distant team work, neither spoke of the compass or its significance. Some connections remained better expressed through shared silence than exposed through unnecessary words. What mattered now was the mission and the larger threat that still loomed somewhere in the mountains around them. The reconnaissance team's findings exceeded expectations. Among the equipment recovered from the neutralized enemy position was a specialized communication device with Russian military encryption and documents referencing Project Siberia training protocols. Most significantly, they recovered a detailed schedule indicating planned training exercises throughout the region over the coming weeks. Back at the base, Reynolds reviewed the intelligence with Sullivan, Morgan, and Lieutenant Torres. The implications were disturbing. "This isn't just a random training operation," Reynolds observed, examining the recovered documents. "They've established a systematic program using our operational area as their practical exercise ground." "Exactly as I suspected," Sullivan confirmed. "Volkov is running a complete qualification course using actual American forces as unwitting training aids for his snipers." Morgan studied the recovered sniper rifle, her expression thoughtful. "The modifications to this Dragunov are sophisticated. Custom trigger assembly, reinforced barrel, advanced optics mount. This isn't standard Russian military issue." "Volkov has always been an innovator," Sullivan remarked. "During the Cold War, he pioneered several sniper techniques that became standard training for Soviet special forces." Lieutenant Torres pointed to the schedule recovered from the enemy position. "According to this, they have 3 more training exercises planned this week, including what they're calling a final qualification event 2 days from now." Reynolds traced the locations marked on the map. "The final qualification target area overlaps with our planned supply convoy route. They're planning to target our vehicles." "That would be consistent with Volkov's escalation pattern," Sullivan confirmed. "Start with individual soldiers, then progress to mobile targets, and eventually critical infrastructure. It's a systematic approach to psychological warfare through precision elimination." Morgan had gone silent, her attention fixed on something in the recovered documents. Reynolds noticed her intensity. "Something catch your attention, Sergeant?" Morgan hesitated before responding. "The final qualification event. It's being personally supervised by someone identified only as primary instructor. Previous events were overseen by assistant instructors." Sullivan's expression darkened. "Volkov, he comes in for the final evaluation personally. It's how he's always operated." The room fell silent as the implications settled in. If Volkov himself would be present, this represented an unprecedented opportunity to not just disrupt the immediate threat, but potentially eliminate the source of the program entirely. If we can confirm Volkov's presence, Reynolds said slowly, we could end this threat permanently rather than just treating the symptoms. It won't be easy, Sullivan cautioned. Volkov isn't careless. He'll position himself at extreme range from any potential threat using terrain features for maximum protection while maintaining observation capability. Morgan finally looked up from the documents. Based on the topographical features and the planned convoy route, there's only one position that would offer the necessary combination of concealment escape routes and extreme range advantage. She moved to the map display, indicating a distant mountain ridge. Here, approximately 3,200 meters from the convoy route. It provides a direct sight line, multiple escape options, and natural protection from counter-sniper positions. Sullivan studied the location, then nodded with grim satisfaction. That's exactly where he'd set up. Perfect terrain for his purposes. Reynolds considered the incredible distance. 3,000+ meters. Is that even within effective range for his snipers? For most, no, Sullivan admitted. But Volkov isn't training most snipers. He's developing specialists specifically for extreme range precision. Can we eliminate them at that distance? Reynolds directed the question to Morgan, whose expertise now seemed essential to their planning. Morgan's expression remained neutral, but her eyes reflected intense calculation. Yes, but it will require specialized equipment, ideal conditions, and perfect execution. Sullivan exchanged a meaningful glance with Morgan. You're talking about a shot that would exceed any officially recorded combat sniper elimination in history. Officially recorded, Morgan repeated quietly, the emphasis subtle but unmistakable. Reynolds caught the implication. Are you saying you've made shots at comparable distances before, Sergeant? Before Morgan could respond, Sullivan intervened. Commander, there are operational parameters that exist beyond official military records. What matters is that Sergeant Morgan has the capability to counter this threat at the required distance given proper support and conditions. Reynolds studied both of them, understanding that he was touching on classified history that neither could openly acknowledge. Very well. What do you need to make this work? Morgan outlined her requirements without hesitation, as if she'd already calculated the mission parameters. I'll need to modify the Barrett further for this specific engagement. Custom ammunition loaded to precise specifications. Complete meteorological data for the target area over a 48-hour period. And a secure position established at least 12 hours before the expected enemy arrival to account for atmospheric condition changes. And one more thing, Sullivan added. I'll be accompanying Sergeant Morgan as spotter. This operation will require experience with Volkov's patterns and the ability to identify him positively among his team. Reynolds nodded, decision made. Make your preparations. Lieutenant Torres will coordinate the necessary resources and ensure you have whatever you need. If Volkov is going to be there, we have a unique opportunity to end this threat permanently. As the meeting concluded, Sullivan held Morgan back while the others departed. When they were alone, he spoke in a low voice that wouldn't carry beyond the room. A shot beyond 3,000 meters under combat conditions. You realize what you're proposing hasn't been done before. Not officially. Morgan met his gaze steadily. Some achievements don't make it into the record books, Master Sergeant. You taught me that. Sullivan's expression softened momentarily. Your father would be proud, you know, of what you've become. The mention of her father caused a brief flicker of emotion to cross Morgan's usually composed features. He never knew what I became. He was gone before I even joined. He knew what you could be. That's why he gave you that compass." Sullivan gestured toward the hidden chain around her neck. "To make sure you'd always find your way, even when the path wasn't marked on any map." Morgan touched the spot where the compass rested against her chest. "You never told me how you knew him." "That's a story for after this mission." Sullivan's tone became professional again. "Right now, we need to focus on making history, even if most of the world will never know about it." As they left the room to begin preparations, neither spoke further of Morgan's father or the compass she carried. The past, with all its complicated connections, would have to wait. The present demanded their complete focus, and the future of many American lives might depend on their ability to execute a shot that defied conventional military possibilities. The coming mission would test not just Morgan's extraordinary skills, but the bond between mentor and student that had been forged years before in classified operations never acknowledged in any official record. Whatever personal history existed between them remained subordinate to the mission at hand, as it always had in their world of shadows and precision. The following morning dawned clear and cold, a blessing for the upcoming mission planning. Morgan began her work before sunrise, setting up a makeshift workspace in a secluded corner of the armory. The Barrett M82A1 lay disassembled before her, each component meticulously arranged according to her precise organizational system. Nearby sat an array of specialized tools, most of which weren't standard military issue, but rather custom implements she'd acquired over years of refining her craft. Sullivan arrived as she was examining the barrel with a bore scope, his presence announced only by the subtle change in air pressure as the door opened. Morgan didn't look up, focused on her inspection. "Barrel harmonics look good," she commented, knowing without checking that it was Sullivan who had entered. "Rifling is pristine. This weapon was barely used before I got to it." Sullivan approached, studying her work with an experienced eye. "The modifications you're planning will void any factory warranty you know." A ghost of a smile touched Morgan's lips. "I think we left warranty territory behind several customizations ago." She reached for a small case containing a set of specialized components. Sullivan recognized some of them from classified weapons development programs items that shouldn't technically be available outside secure research facilities. "Do I want to know where you acquired those?" he asked, keeping his voice low, despite their relative privacy. Morgan began installing a modified trigger assembly with practiced precision. "Probably not. Let's just say I have friends in research and development who understand that field requirements sometimes exceed official specifications." Sullivan nodded, accepting the non-explanation. In their world, results mattered more than procedural adherence, especially when facing threats that operated beyond conventional parameters. "I brought you something," Sullivan said, placing a weathered leather case on the table. "Might help with what we're attempting." Morgan paused her work, giving the case a curious glance. Sullivan opened it to reveal a custom ballistic calculator unlike anything available in standard military channels. The device appeared decades old, but had clearly been updated with modern components. "My old friend," Sullivan explained. "Custom built for extreme range calculations back in the Gulf War days, but I've had the internals modernized every few years. It accounts for variables most systems don't even recognize." Morgan examined the device with careful hands. Coriolis effect, Earth curvature, atmospheric refraction, and... She paused, noticing an unusual calculation parameter, barometric pressure gradient variation. "That's the one that makes the difference beyond 3,000 meters, Sullivan confirmed. "Most systems assume constant barometric pressure across the bullet's flight path. In reality, pressure can vary significantly over extreme distances, especially in mountainous terrain. This accounts for those variations." "This is incredible," Morgan admitted, genuine appreciation in her voice. I've been compensating for gradient variations manually. No need for that now. Sullivan watched as she familiarized herself with the device. It was built by a NASA engineer who happened to be a competitive long-range shooter. Only 3 were ever made. The other 2 are in a museum somewhere. Morgan looked up, the question clear in her eyes. Consider it a loan, Sullivan said, for a mission that matters. Their quiet moment of technical appreciation was interrupted by Lieutenant Torres, who entered with a stack of weather data printouts and terrain analyses. Morning, Torres greeted them, placing the materials on a nearby table. Meteorological data for the target area covering the past week, and projected conditions for the next 48 hours. I've also included detailed terrain models showing elevation changes, ground composition, and vegetation density. Morgan glanced through the materials, impressed by the thoroughness. This is excellent work, Lieutenant. The level of detail will make a significant difference. I have a brother in atmospheric sciences at NOAA, Torres explained. He helped me extract the high-resolution data. Didn't tell him why I needed it, of course. Sullivan studied the weather projections. Looks like a cold front moving in tomorrow night. Could change conditions significantly. That's the challenging part, Torres confirmed. We're expecting a temperature drop of approximately 15 degrees with shifting wind patterns as the front establishes. If Volkov follows the schedule, we recovered his final qualification exercise will occur right during this transition period. Morgan considered this information, mental calculations already running. Changing conditions would actually make sense for a final qualification. It tests the trainee's ability to adapt to dynamic variables rather than static scenarios. Makes your job harder too, Sullivan pointed out. Morgan nodded. But not impossible. The transition itself becomes a variable we incorporate. The key is establishing position early enough to track the changes and build them into the solution. Torres watched as Morgan made notes on the weather patterns, fascinated by the sniper's methodical approach. Commander Reynolds wants an update at 0900. He's coordinating with the convoy to ensure their route provides the optimal target scenario while maintaining operational security. After Torres departed, Sullivan and Morgan returned to their preparations. Morgan continued the painstaking process of modifying the Barrett, while Sullivan began programming the environmental variables into his specialized ballistic calculator. You should know, Sullivan said after a period of focused silence, that once we confirm Volkov's presence, this becomes more than just a counter-sniper operation. Morgan's hands stilled momentarily. Meaning, intelligence has wanted Volkov neutralized for decades. His Siberia program has trained specialists who've been linked to assassinations across 3 continents. If we successfully eliminate him, it would disrupt Russian asymmetric capabilities significantly. You're saying there's political interest in this operation beyond the immediate tactical concerns? Sullivan nodded. Colonel Harrison didn't send us here just to protect a convoy. He sent us to end Volkov's program permanently. Morgan resumed her work, her expression unreadable. Does that change our approach? It means we'll have eyes watching from well beyond this base. Success will be noted at the highest levels. And failure, Sullivan's expression hardened, isn't an option. Not with Volkov. I've seen what his graduates are capable of. Each one becomes a strategic-level threat once deployed. Morgan picked up a custom bolt carrier she'd been modifying. You seem to have significant personal history with him. We've crossed paths more than once. Cold War operations, mostly. Panama in '89 was the last direct encounter. Sullivan's voice took on a weary, emotional edge. He's a true believer in Russian military superiority, even after the Soviet collapse. considers what he's doing a continuation of the ideological struggle. And you, I just consider him a threat that should have been neutralized years ago. Sullivan closed his ballistic calculator. We'll finally get that chance, assuming you can make a shot that defies conventional military doctrine. Morgan's response was to hold up the modified bolt carrier, which now contained a firing pin assembly unlike anything in standard military specifications. Conventional doctrine didn't account for this. The mission briefing with Commander Reynolds revealed the full scope of their operation. The command center's main display showed detailed satellite imagery of the planned convoy route alongside topographical renderings of the surrounding mountains. Reynolds, Sullivan, Morgan, and Torres stood around the display as Reynolds outlined the situation. Based on the intelligence recovered yesterday, we've modified our convoy operations to create what appears to be a target of opportunity, Reynolds explained. 3 vehicles will move along this eastern route at approximately 0900 tomorrow, matching the time frame indicated in Volkov's training schedule. He indicated a winding road that passed through a valley between 2 mountain ranges. The vehicles will be unmanned, remotely operated from our command center. If Volkov's team engages as expected, they'll be firing at empty targets while exposing their position. Sullivan nodded approvingly. Good adaptation, though Volkov might suspect a trap. That's why we'll have a secondary convoy of actual supply vehicles following a different route 30 minutes later, Reynolds continued. Small security detail, standard configuration. From satellite reconnaissance, they'll appear to be the actual high-value target. Our assessment is that Volkov will focus his trainees on the decoy convoy while observing from his position here. Reynolds indicated a distant ridgeline approximately 200 meters from the convoy route. This matches Sergeant Morgan's assessment of his likely observation post. Morgan studied the ridgeline carefully. The position offers excellent sightlines and multiple exfiltration options. It's consistent with Volkov's documented tactical preferences. What about our position? Torres asked. Where will Morgan and Sullivan establish their counter-sniper location? Reynolds highlighted another area on the map. We've identified this ridge as offering the optimal combination of concealment and sight lines to Volkov's expected position. Distance is approximately 247 meters from the target area. A heavy silence fell over the room as the number registered. Everyone present understood the significance of attempting a precision shot at that range. Most military snipers considered 1,500 meters the outer boundary of reliable effectiveness in combat conditions. Let me be absolutely clear, Reynolds said, breaking the silence. This operation has 2 distinct objectives. First, gather intelligence on Volkov's Siberia program by observing his training methods and equipment. Second, if positive identification is confirmed and conditions permit, eliminate Volkov himself. He turned specifically to Morgan. Sergeant, I need your honest assessment. Is a shot at this distance actually possible under field conditions? Morgan met his gaze directly. Yes, sir. With the proper preparations, equipment, and environmental conditions, it's possible. Not guaranteed, but possible. The margin for error at that distance is measured in millimeters, at the muzzle translating to meters at the target, Sullivan added. It would be the longest confirmed sniper elimination in history. Reynolds nodded, accepting their assessment. The mission proceeds in 3 phases. Phase 1, Morgan and Sullivan infiltrate to their position tonight, establishing observation by 0200 hours. Phase 2, from first light until enemy appearance, gather intelligence on Volkov's operation. Phase 3, upon confirmation of Volkov's identity, attempt neutralization if conditions permit. He looked at each of them in turn. Questions. Extraction plan, Morgan asked. Once the shot is taken, successful or not, your position will likely be compromised, Reynolds acknowledged. A quick reaction force will be stationed here approximately 2 kilometers from your position. He indicated a concealed valley on the map. They'll move on your signal for immediate extraction via ground transport. Helicopter support will be available, but held in reserve due to the risk of enemy anti-aircraft capabilities. Sullivan studied the extraction route. Secondary exfiltration option. If primary extraction fails, proceed to emergency rendezvous point Charlie. Supply cache will be established with 72 hours of survival equipment, emergency communications, and defensive weapons. The thoroughness of the planning reflected the high-risk nature of the operation. Reynolds concluded the briefing with a final note. The intelligence value of this mission cannot be overstated. Confirmation of Volkov's techniques, equipment, and training methodology will significantly enhance our counter-sniper capabilities. His elimination would disrupt Russian asymmetric warfare programs for years to come. He paused, looking directly at Morgan and Sullivan. However, your safety remains the priority. If conditions don't support the shot, gather what intelligence you can and extract. We'll find another opportunity. Sullivan gave Morgan a sideways glance, both knowing that another opportunity to eliminate Volkov might never materialize. The stakes couldn't be higher. As the meeting concluded and final preparations began, Morgan and Sullivan found a quiet moment to conduct a final check of their equipment. Morgan had completed the modifications to her Barrett, transforming the already formidable weapon into something uniquely suited for the extraordinary challenge ahead. "I've never seen a Barrett configured quite like this," Sullivan commented, examining the extensively modified rifle. "The recoil reduction system alone must have taken months to perfect." "It did," Morgan confirmed, carefully loading custom ammunition into magazines. Each round had been hand-loaded to her exact specifications, achieving a level of consistency impossible with factory ammunition. The floating barrel system is completely redesigned to maintain harmonics at extreme distances. Sullivan picked up one of the rounds, noting its distinct appearance compared to standard pattern .50 caliber ammunition. Reduced powder load, slightly, increases consistency at the cost of some muzzle velocity. The aerodynamic profile of the projectile compensates for the velocity reduction while significantly improving ballistic coefficient. The technical discussion served as a form of pre-mission ritual for them both, focusing their minds on the concrete details rather than the enormity of what they were attempting. "There's something you should know before we deploy," Sullivan said, his tone shifting to something more personal. "About your father." Morgan's hands stilled. "This isn't the time, Master Sergeant." "There might not be another time." Sullivan's voice remained steady. "Your father saved my life in Somalia. Not just mine. Our entire team. He made a shot that nobody thought possible at a distance that violated everything we'd been taught about the limits of precision marksmanship." Morgan remained silent, but Sullivan could see she was listening intently. "When he gave you that compass right before his final deployment, he told me something I've never shared with you. He said you had an intuitive understanding of ballistics that couldn't be taught, that you'd go further than he ever did if you were given the chance." Morgan's expression softened slightly. "He said that before I'd ever even fired a rifle, he saw something in you. The same thing I saw years later when you came through training." Sullivan placed a hand briefly on her shoulder, a rare gesture of personal connection. "Tomorrow, you'll have the chance to prove him right, in ways he couldn't have imagined." Morgan nodded once, tucking the memory away alongside her father's compass. "We should finish preparations. Infiltration begins at dusk." The night air bit with unexpected coldness as Morgan and Sullivan made their final approach to the observation position. They had moved for hours through the rugged terrain, each carrying essential equipment, while maintaining strict noise and light discipline. Their route had been carefully planned to avoid known Taliban patrol areas and maximize natural concealment. Morgan moved with the fluid efficiency of someone long accustomed to operating in hostile environments. Despite carrying the heavy Barrett and additional equipment, she navigated the difficult terrain with seemingly effortless precision. Sullivan, despite being more than 30 years her senior, kept pace with the disciplined movement of a lifetime operator. They reached their planned position shortly after midnight, a natural depression in the rocky ridgeline that offered both concealment and a clear line of sight to Volkov's expected location. Working in near-total darkness, guided only by night vision equipment, they began establishing their hide. Morgan assembled her firing platform first, ensuring absolute stability on the uneven terrain. Sullivan set up the observation post with multiple spotting scopes and the specialized ballistic calculator. Their movements were choreographed through years of training and experience, requiring minimal communication. "Weather shift coming sooner than expected," Sullivan whispered after consulting a handheld device. "Barometric pressure already dropping. Wind patterns will change within the next 6 hours." Morgan nodded, making mental note of the information as she completed her weapon setup. More time to track the changes before engagement. Could work to our advantage. By 200 hours, their position was fully established. The Barrett rested on its custom mount, perfectly aligned toward the distant ridge, where Volkov was expected to appear in approximately 7 hours. Morgan had already calculated initial firing solutions based on current conditions, but both knew these would require constant adjustment as environmental factors changed. Sullivan set up a monitoring system that would track minute changes in wind speed, temperature, and barometric pressure, feeding the data to his specialized calculator. "Get some rest. I'll take first watch and wake you at 0430. Morgan shook her head. "I need to feel the changing conditions. Sleep would reset my sensory calibration." Sullivan understood. Elite snipers often developed an almost supernatural connection to environmental conditions, their bodies becoming living sensors, attuned to subtle changes that might affect a bullet's flight. "At least conserve your energy. Tomorrow we'll test everything you've got." Morgan settled into a comfortable position that still allowed her to maintain awareness of her surroundings. The mountains loomed around them, massive shadows against the star-filled sky. In the distance, the occasional sound of artillery fire reminded them of the ongoing conflict that formed the backdrop for their specialized mission. "Sullivan," Morgan said after a long silence, "if this works, what happens to the record? The longest confirmed shot?" Sullivan considered the question. "Officially, nothing. This operation doesn't exist on paper. No records, no confirmation, no certificates of achievement. And unofficially, word gets around in certain circles. The people who need to know will know. The rest won't ever hear about it." Sullivan adjusted his night vision device. "Does that bother you?" Morgan was quiet for a moment. "No, recognition was never the point." "What was the point then?" "Completing the mission, protecting our people." She paused. "And proving something to myself." Sullivan nodded, understanding perfectly. "Your father felt the same way. He never cared about the recognition either." As dawn approached, bringing with it the first hints of light on the eastern horizon, both operators shifted fully into mission mode. Sullivan began methodically scanning the distant ridgeline, where Volkov was expected to appear, while Morgan made final adjustments to her firing position and equipment. "Wind shifting northwest 5 knots, Sullivan reported. "Temperature 34 degrees Fahrenheit dropping. Barometric pressure continuing to fall ahead of the front." Morgan recorded the data, incorporating it into her calculations. "Humidity rising. Will affect density, altitude, and bullet drop at extreme range." The sun rose slowly, illuminating the mountainous landscape with golden light that gradually revealed the full complexity of the terrain before them. In the valley below, preparations for the decoy convoy would be underway, though from their position, nothing was visible except the winding road that served as the primary supply route. "Movement target ridgeline," Sullivan announced, suddenly his voice dropping to a near whisper despite their isolation. "Two figures, establishing position. Range 3,247 meters." Morgan shifted smoothly into position behind her rifle, her eye finding the scope with practiced precision. Through the advanced optics, she could make out two individuals setting up what appeared to be a concealed observation post on the distant ridge. Confirmed. Two subjects. Military bearing using proper tactical movement. She adjusted her scope slightly. Equipment appears consistent with advanced sniper operations. Spotting, scopes, rangefinders, communications gear. Sullivan studied the figures through his powerful spotting scope. Neither matches Volkov's profile. These are advanced team establishing the position for the main element. For the next hour, they watched as the two figures methodically prepared their position, setting up equipment and concealment with professional efficiency. Their movements confirmed Sullivan's assessment that these were highly trained specialists rather than conventional military or insurgent fighters. "Additional movement approaching from the eastern slope," Sullivan reported. "Three more individuals. Lead figure matches Volkov's height and movement profile." Morgan adjusted her scope to capture the new arrivals. The lead figure moved with the confident authority of someone accustomed to command. Even at this extreme distance, there was something distinctive about his bearing that set him apart from his subordinates. "Possible visual confirmation," she said. "Subject appears to be directing the others, establishing command presence." Sullivan studied the new arrival intently. Facial recognition inconclusive at this range, but physical dimensions and behavior are consistent with Volkov. Age appropriate, approximately 65 to 70 years. Awaiting positive ID before engagement authorization. Morgan responded, falling back on procedural discipline despite the rising certainty. They observed as the new arrivals integrated with the advance team, establishing what was clearly a training position focused on the valley below. The leader, presumed to be Volkov, directed the placement of equipment with precise gestures that suggested intimate familiarity with sniper operations. "They're setting up multiple firing positions," Sullivan observed. "Looks like three distinct sniper teams, each focused on different sections of the convoy route. This is definitely the final qualification exercise." Morgan tracked the leader's movements, noting how the others responded to his direction. "Lead subject is instructing demonstrating sight picture calculations, consistent with senior instructor role." Sullivan shifted his spotting scope, focusing on the leader's face during a moment when he turned toward their general direction. Facial features match Volkov's most recent intelligence photos. Silver hair, beard, facial scar extending from right temple to jaw. "Confirmation sufficient for identification," Morgan concluded. "Subject is Anton Volkov, primary target." The positive identification sent a subtle but palpable tension through their hide position. What had been a surveillance operation now transformed into a direct action mission with extraordinary parameters. Morgan began refining her firing solution based on the exact position where Volkov had established himself. Range confirmed at 3,247 meters, Sullivan reported, feeding data into his specialized ballistic calculator. Wind at target position estimated at 7 knots, quartering from northeast. Temperature 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Barometric pressure continuing to fall. Morgan absorbed the information, making minute adjustments to her scope and mental calculations. Coriolis effect, significant at this range with target bearing. Earth rotation will push the bullet approximately 37 centimeters right during the flight time. Sullivan nodded approvingly at her inclusion of this often overlooked factor. The rotation of the Earth itself would affect the bullet's path during its extended flight time, a consideration that separated truly elite snipers from merely excellent ones. Bullet flight time approximately 6 seconds at this range, Morgan continued, thinking aloud. Vertical deflection due to gravity calculated at approximately 27 meters. Adjusting elevation to compensate. As they continued their preparations, the radio crackled softly with an encrypted transmission from base. Overwatch, this is Sierra Actual. Decoy convoy departing in 30 minutes. Confirm observation of target area. Sullivan keyed his radio. Sierra Actual, this is Overwatch. Target area under observation. 5 individuals identified at primary position, including confirmed high-value target. They appear to be preparing for the convoy's arrival. Overwatch, understand, high-value target confirmed. You have authorization for elimination if conditions permit. Priority remains intelligence gathering on training methods and equipment. Execute your judgment on timing. Sierra Actual, Overwatch copies all. Will advise when conditions support engagement. With official authorization now granted, the mission entered its most critical phase. Morgan and Sullivan continued monitoring the target area, recording detailed observations of Volkov's training methods as he positioned his students and provided instruction. He's demonstrating wind calculation techniques, Sullivan noted, using handheld devices but also natural indicators like vegetation movement. Classical Russian methodology combined with modern technology. Morgan observed the trainees' responses, noting their disciplined attention to Volkov's instruction. They're setting up for a coordinated engagement, multiple shooters targeting different vehicles simultaneously. Classic Volkov doctrine, synchronized precision eliminations for maximum psychological impact. Sullivan's voice carried a hint of grudging professional respect. He's teaching them to create the impression of omniscient threat. Nowhere is safe. No one is beyond reach. As they continued their surveillance, the weather front accelerated its approach. Dark clouds gathered on the western horizon, promising the significant temperature and pressure changes forecast in their meteorological data. Weather deteriorating faster than predicted, Sullivan reported, consulting his instruments. Barometric pressure dropping rapidly. Wind patterns becoming erratic as the front approaches. Morgan felt the changing conditions instinctively, her body registering subtle shifts in air density and movement. The shot window might close before the convoy arrives. Conditions are becoming increasingly marginal for extreme range engagement. Sullivan studied Volkov through his spotting scope. He knows it too. Look at him. He's instructing his students on adjusting for rapidly changing conditions. This isn't coincidence. He deliberately scheduled this exercise during a weather transition to challenge their adaptability. The realization brought a new dimension to their mission. Volkov wasn't just training snipers. He was creating adaptive specialists capable of operating at the very edge of what was technically possible. The sophistication of his program exceeded even Sullivan's expectations. Decoy convoy visible entering the valley from the western approach, Morgan reported, catching movement in her peripheral vision. 3 vehicles maintaining approximately 50 meters spacing. Through their scopes, they watched as Volkov and his trainees immediately took notice of the approaching convoy. The training session intensified, with Volkov directing each sniper team to specific vehicles and providing last-minute instruction on engagement parameters. They're preparing to fire, Sullivan observed, calculating firing solutions, making final adjustments. The critical moment for their own mission had arrived. With Volkov focused on the training exercise, his attention directed toward the valley rather than potential threats, they had their best opportunity for a successful engagement. Conditions assessment for primary target engagement. Morgan asked, her voice calm, despite the enormity of what they were preparing to attempt. Sullivan consulted his specialized calculator, incorporating the latest environmental data. Marginal but within parameters. Wind at our position, steady at 4 knots from northwest. Wind at target position estimated at 9 knots shifting. Temperature continuing to drop currently, 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Barometric pressure falling rapidly ahead of the front. Morgan absorbed this information, making final adjustments to her scope. Updating firing solution. Elevation adjusted to compensate for increased bullet drop due to lower temperature and barometric pressure. She settled into her firing position, body perfectly aligned behind the rifle. Her breathing slowed, heart rate decreasing through conscious control developed through thousands of hours of training and operational experience. Target is stationary, currently kneeling while instructing the trainee on the right. Sullivan reported, his voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of an experienced spotter. Range 3,247 meters. Wind holding steady at our position, variable at target. Morgan established her natural point of aim, finding the precise body position where the rifle settled naturally on target with minimal muscular input. This technique, critical for extreme precision, eliminated the minute tremors caused by muscular tension that could translate to meters of deviation at such extraordinary range. Solution calculated. I have a firing position. Awaiting final wind call. Sullivan observed the environmental indicators with intense focus. Distant vegetation movement, dust patterns, and heat mirage all provided critical information that even the most sophisticated instruments couldn't fully capture. Wind shifting at target. Hold for stabilization. Sullivan watched patiently, reading the subtle signs that would indicate the optimal moment for engagement. Wind settling, pattern establishing, call when ready. Morgan's world narrowed to the precise alignment of crosshairs on the distant figure of Anton Volkov. Time seemed to slow as her awareness expanded to encompass every environmental factor that would affect the bullet's flight. Her index finger took up the first pressure on the trigger, finding the precise point where only a few ounces of additional pressure would release the firing pin. "Send it," Sullivan whispered, indicating the optimal moment as wind conditions momentarily stabilized. Morgan completed the trigger pull with perfect technique, maintaining absolute position as the Barrett roared. The massive rifle's recoil was absorbed by her positioning and the custom modifications, allowing her to maintain sight picture through the scope. The extraordinary distance meant several seconds would pass before the bullet reached its target. In those moments, time seemed suspended as both operators tracked the invisible path through their optics. "Impact," Sullivan announced the professional detachment in his voice, masking the significance of what they had just witnessed. "Direct hit center mass. Target down." Through her scope, Morgan observed the immediate reaction among Volkov's team. Confusion erupted as their leader collapsed without warning. The trainees scrambled for cover, clearly unprepared for becoming targets themselves. "Confirm termination of high-value target," Morgan requested, maintaining her professional composure despite the historic shot she had just executed. Sullivan studied the fallen figure through his spotting scope. "Confirmed. No movement, catastrophic trauma evident. Volkov is neutralized." Morgan maintained her position, scanning for additional threats as Sullivan keyed the radio. "Sierra actual overwatch. High-value target successfully engaged and neutralized. Range 3,247 meters. Conditions deteriorating rapidly. Request immediate extraction initiation." Overwatch Sierra actual. Understood. Extraction team deploying to your location. ETA 20 minutes. Be advised, significant enemy movement detected in your vicinity. Proceed to extraction point Alpha immediately. The successful elimination of Volkov had achieved their primary mission objective, but now presented an immediate tactical challenge. The shot, despite its extraordinary distance, had compromised their position. Volkov's remaining team, all expert snipers themselves, would quickly begin countermeasures to locate and eliminate the threat. "Time to move," Sullivan said, already beginning to break down their observation equipment. "They'll start search patterns within minutes." Morgan dismantled her firing platform with practiced efficiency, securing the Barrett in its transport configuration. "Agreed. Primary extraction route likely compromised. Recommend alternate approach to extraction point." As they packed their essential equipment, discarding anything non-critical to reduce weight and increase mobility, the distant sound of small arms fire confirmed their assessment. Volkov's team had recovered from their initial shock and were implementing counter-sniper protocols. "They're establishing a search perimeter," Sullivan observed. "Methodical sweep patterns starting from the most likely firing positions based on distance and terrain." Morgan secured the last of her equipment. "Ready to move. Proposed route through the eastern ravine, then north along the ridgeline. Provides maximum concealment from likely search vectors." Sullivan nodded approval, shouldering his pack. "Lead the way." As they departed their position, both knew they had just made military history with a shot that defied conventional wisdom about the limits of precision marksmanship. But professional satisfaction would have to wait. The immediate reality demanded their complete focus on survival and extraction. The mountains that had provided their concealment now became the backdrop for a deadly game of cat and mouse with expert hunters on both sides. What had begun as a precision elimination mission had transformed into a race against pursuers determined to exact revenge for their fallen leader. Their movement through the rugged terrain was swift but careful, balancing the need for speed against the risk of detection. Morgan led the way, choosing a route that maximized natural cover and minimal exposure to potential observation points. Sullivan followed occasionally, checking their back trail for signs of pursuit. After 20 minutes of careful movement, they paused briefly in a concealed position to assess their situation. The sound of searching teams had grown more distant, suggesting their evasion strategy was working. "Extraction team reports they're holding at rally point, approximately 1 kilometer northwest of our position," Sullivan said quietly, checking their secure communications device. "Enemy activity increasing between our location and the primary extraction point." Morgan studied their topographical map. "Secondary route through this drainage system. Adds 15 minutes to our approach, but provides continuous concealment." Sullivan nodded agreement. "Let's move. Weather front is accelerating. Visibility will decrease significantly once it hits, which works to our advantage." As they prepared to continue, the distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle split the air, followed immediately by the impact of a round into the rocks mere inches from Morgan's position. "Sniper move!" Sullivan urged, already rolling toward better cover. Morgan reacted instantly, diving behind a large boulder as another shot struck nearby. The precision of the fire confirmed what they already knew. Volkov's trained specialists were now hunting them with the same expertise they had just demonstrated against their mentor. "Direction?" Morgan asked, pressing herself against the protective stone. "Eastern ridge, approximately 800 meters, Sullivan replied. "Single shooter, likely one of the trainees we observed." The relatively close range put them at a significant disadvantage. Morgan's Barrett was optimized for extreme distance engagement, not the quick, responsive shooting needed for this closer threat. Sullivan, however, carried a more versatile M110 semi-automatic sniper system better suited for this type of encounter. "I'll establish a counter position," Sullivan decided, already moving toward a small outcropping that would provide both cover and a firing line. "You continue toward the extraction point. I'll delay them and follow." "Negative," Morgan responded firmly. "We extract together." Another shot struck nearby, showering them with rock fragments. The enemy sniper was walking rounds closer to their position, using each impact to refine their location. "This isn't a negotiation, Sergeant," Sullivan said, his tone shifting to formal command. "Completing the mission requires at least one of us to reach extraction with confirmation of Volkov's elimination. Tactical doctrine is clear." Morgan knew he was right. Standard operating procedure in their world prioritized mission completion over individual considerations. Still leaving Sullivan behind contradicted everything she believed about team operations. "10-minute delay, then you follow," she countered. "I'll establish position at the extraction point to provide cover for your approach." Before Sullivan could argue further, Morgan was moving, using available cover to break line of sight with the enemy sniper's position. Sullivan immediately began setting up his counter-sniper position, preparing to buy her the time needed to reach safety. Morgan moved with practiced stealth through the rocky terrain, maintaining awareness of potential threat vectors while progressing toward the extraction point. The weather front had arrived in full force, bringing with it decreased visibility and gusting winds that would complicate enemy search efforts. After 15 minutes of careful movement, she reached the vicinity of the extraction point. The designated landing zone was a small plateau sheltered on three sides by rocky outcroppings, accessible by a single approach path from the south. Morgan established a position overlooking this approach, unpacking her Barrett and setting up a hasty firing position. Her radio crackled with Sullivan's voice. "Overwatch 2 to Overwatch 1. Be advised, multiple hostile elements converging on your position from the northeast. Extraction team reports, ready for immediate departure." "Overwatch 1 copies. What's your position?" "Engaged with enemy elements. Delayed by flanking attempt." Sullivan's controlled breathing suggested he was in the middle of a sniper duel. "Proceed with extraction. I'll utilize secondary exfiltration route to emergency rendezvous point, Charlie." Morgan's chest tightened. The secondary route was a high-risk option, designed as a last resort rather than a planned extraction. It would require Sullivan to evade enemy forces for potentially days before reaching safety. "Negative Overwatch 2. Holding position to provide cover for your approach." "That's an order, Sergeant. Complete the mission. Confirm Volkov's elimination to command. I'll make my own way out." Before Morgan could respond, the sound of approaching aircraft cut through the mountain air. The extraction helicopter was arriving, despite the deteriorating weather conditions, testament to the mission's priority level. As the helicopter approached, Morgan faced an impossible choice: follow orders and extract with confirmation of mission success, or hold position to support Sullivan's extraction, despite direct orders to the contrary. It was the kind of decision that defined operators in their line of work, where protocols sometimes conflicted with personal codes. The helicopter settled onto the landing zone rotors, whipping the already turbulent air into a frenzy. The crew chief gestured urgently for her to board the aircraft vulnerable while stationary in potentially hostile territory. Morgan keyed her radio one final time. "Overwatch 2 extraction arrived. Confirm your intent to utilize secondary exfiltration route." Sullivan's voice came through clearly, despite the background sound of gunfire. "Intent confirmed. Now get on that helicopter, Sergeant. That's an order." With reluctance born of professional respect rather than personal attachment, Morgan moved toward the waiting helicopter. As she approached, the distinctive sound of her Barrett firing caught everyone by surprise. Morgan whirled to see Sullivan had somehow reached her position and was providing covering fire from where she had just been. "Go!" he shouted over the roar of the helicopter. "I'll be right behind you." Morgan leapt aboard the aircraft, immediately turning to provide security as Sullivan broke from his position and sprinted toward them. Behind him, multiple muzzle flashes indicated Volkov's team had located them and was closing in rapidly. Sullivan was halfway to the helicopter when a round caught him in the leg, sending him sprawling onto the rocky ground. Without hesitation, Morgan was moving, jumping from the helicopter, despite the crew chief's attempts to restrain her. "Covering fire!" she shouted to the door gunner, who immediately began laying down suppressive fire toward the enemy positions. Morgan reached Sullivan, who was already struggling to regain his feet, despite the clearly serious wound. "I gave you an order, Sergeant," he grunted, blood soaking his pant leg. "I never was good at following orders, Master Sergeant." Morgan helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as they moved toward the waiting helicopter. "Something I learned from my first instructor." The helicopter crew chief and another operator jumped down to assist, practically carrying Sullivan the final distance to the aircraft. As they pulled him aboard, enemy fire intensified around them. Morgan was the last to board, providing final covering fire before leaping into the helicopter as it began to lift. "Go, go, go!" the crew chief shouted to the pilots, who immediately initiated a steep climbing turn away from the landing zone. As the helicopter gained altitude and speed, Morgan turned her attention to Sullivan's wound. The bullet had passed through his upper thigh, missing the femoral artery, but causing significant bleeding. "Just like Somalia, huh?" Sullivan said through gritted teeth as Morgan applied a tourniquet. "Your father pulled the same stunt. Never could leave a teammate behind even when the book said he should." Morgan managed a tight smile. Some things must run in the family. The helicopter banked sharply, heading back toward the safety of the forward operating base. Behind them, the mountains where they had just made military history, a history that would never be officially recorded, faded into the storm clouds that had provided their final cover. In the cargo area of the helicopter, surrounded by operators who would never fully understand what they had just accomplished, Morgan finally allowed herself to acknowledge the magnitude of their mission. A shot at 3,207 mm combat conditions with a successful outcome beyond what any military doctrine considered possible. Sullivan caught her eye, reading her thoughts with the insight of a longtime mentor. "Not bad for a day's work," he said simply. Morgan nodded, the understatement perfectly capturing their shared professional ethos. "Not bad at all, Master Sergeant." As the helicopter carried them back to base, both knew that while official records would never reflect their achievement, their mission had changed the calculus of precision warfare in ways that would ripple through specialized communities for years to come. More importantly, they had eliminated a threat that had endangered American forces throughout the region, bringing an end to Volkov's deadly Siberia program. For operators like Morgan and Sullivan, that was the only recognition that truly mattered. The helicopter descended toward the forward operating base as medical personnel rushed across the landing pad. Morgan maintained pressure on Sullivan's wound, her eyes scanning the growing crowd of personnel. The successful elimination of Volkov at 3,207 would send ripples through the special operations community, but for now, the immediate concern was ensuring Sullivan's survival. As the rotors slowed, medical staff swarmed the aircraft with practiced efficiency. Sullivan grimaced as they transferred him to a stretcher, his legendary stoicism finally showing cracks. "Not exactly how I planned our extraction," he managed through gritted teeth. "Been a while since I've been carried out of an operation." "First time for everything," Morgan replied, her tone professional despite the concern in her eyes. "Though I'd prefer not to make it a habit." Commander Reynolds approached as Sullivan was whisked toward the medical facility, his expression a careful mask of command neutrality, but Morgan detected something else beneath it. A new awareness, perhaps even respect, that hadn't been there before. "Sergeant Morgan's status report." "Mission accomplished, sir. Target positively identified and eliminated at 3,247 meters. Master Sergeant Sullivan sustained a gunshot wound during extraction. Prognosis appears favorable." Reynolds nodded, absorbing the information with a slight widening of his eyes at the confirmed distance. The intelligence team wants your detailed debrief as soon as possible. Colonel Harrison is already en route from headquarters. I'd like to check on Master Sergeant Sullivan first if possible. Of course. Medical will stabilize him before likely evacuating to Bagram. You can see him before transport. Reynolds paused, studying her with newfound intensity. What you accomplish today will change our understanding of precision engagement capabilities. Morgan acknowledged the statement with a slight nod before heading toward the medical facility. As she passed through the base, she noticed the shift in how others regarded her. Word had already spread, and the skepticism that had greeted her arrival was replaced by something else entirely, a mixture of awe and the cautious respect operators reserved for those who had proven themselves in ways that defied conventional explanation. She paused outside the medical facility door, listening to the unmistakable sounds of Sullivan arguing with medical personnel. Some things remained predictable even after extraordinary events. "It's a simple through and through," Sullivan was insisting as she entered. "I've had worse paper cuts." "With respect, Master Sergeant," the exasperated doctor replied, "that's not how gunshot wounds work." Sullivan's eyes found Morgan relief, momentarily replacing his frustration. "Morgan, tell this overeducated witch doctor that I'm perfectly capable of completing the mission debrief before evacuation." She assessed his condition with the practiced eye of someone familiar with battlefield injuries. The medical team had stabilized him, but the pallor of his skin and the monitoring equipment told a more honest story than his bravado. "The doctor's right," she said firmly. "Medical protocol takes precedence." Sullivan's eyebrows shot up. "Since when do you follow protocols to the letter? You disregarded a direct extraction order less than 3 hours ago." "Tactical necessity," she countered smoothly, "just as your medical evacuation is now." The doctor shot her a grateful glance before returning to his preparations. Sullivan motioned Morgan closer, lowering his voice. "Harrison's coming personally. That doesn't happen for routine operations. We eliminated Volkov, hardly routine. It's more than that." Sullivan glanced at the medical staff before continuing. "The shot you made? It confirmed something they've been watching for." Before Morgan could press for clarification, the doctor returned. "The medevac arrives in 10 minutes. We need to complete preparations." Sullivan gripped Morgan's wrist with surprising strength. "Remember what I taught you about after-action reports. Some details aren't meant for official documentation." "I'll handle the debrief," she assured him, the unspoken understanding passing between them. "Morgan," Sullivan called as she turned to leave, "check my personal locker at Bagram. The keys with Torres. Your father left something for you. It's time." The mention of her father sent an unexpected jolt through Morgan's carefully maintained professional detachment. Sullivan had rarely mentioned her father, despite apparently knowing him well enough to be entrusted with his personal effects. As she left the medical facility, Morgan nearly collided with Lieutenant Torres, who seemed to have been waiting for her. "Quite an operation," Torres said, falling into step beside her. "Successful elimination at extreme range, emergency extraction under fire, wounded teammate. The stuff of special operations legend." Morgan studied Torres with renewed interest. The lieutenant's casual demeanor masked something more complex. "You seem remarkably well-informed for base intelligence support." Torres smiled slightly. "I've been tracking Volkov's network for 18 months. Today's operation advanced that work significantly." She handed Morgan a small leather pouch. "Sullivan asked me to give you this if things went sideways. Said you'd understand its significance." Inside was a weathered brass key attached to a faded leather tag bearing a sequence of numbers. "Storage locker at Bagram," Torres explained. "And before you ask, no, I don't know what's inside. Some things remain compartmentalized, even in our world." Morgan pocketed the key, her mind already cataloging the implications. Sullivan had prepared for the possibility that he wouldn't return from the mission, ensuring Morgan would receive whatever her father had left behind. That level of preparation suggested the item's significance extended beyond mere sentimental value. "Colonel Harrison wants the formal debrief in 30 minutes, Torres continued. "Command Center secure room Alpha. You might want to clean up first." After a brief shower and change into fresh uniform, Morgan made her way to the command center. The facility buzzed with unusual activity, intelligence analysts working with evident urgency. Through the glass wall of a conference room, she spotted Reynolds conferring with several senior officers she didn't recognize. As she approached, a tall figure turned toward her. Colonel William Harrison. Despite his 68 years, he carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to wielding authority at the highest levels. His silver hair was regulation short, his penetrating blue eyes missing nothing as they assessed her. "Sergeant Morgan," he acknowledged, extending his hand. "Exceptional work today." "Thank you, sir." Harrison gestured toward a reinforced room at the rear of the command center. "Some aspects of this debrief require heightened security protocols." Once inside the Safikif, Harrison activated specialized recording equipment, while Reynolds and 2 intelligence officers prepared their documentation materials. "Recording protocols active," one of the officers confirmed. "Classified debrief operation, silent precision security clearance level, top secret SCI." Harrison led the questioning with practiced precision, guiding Morgan through a detailed recounting of the operation, focusing particularly on the engagement parameters. "Target engaged at Yo-843. Morgan reported, maintaining the professional detachment that characterized elite operators. "Distance to target measured at 3,247 meters. Single-shot engagement, utilizing modified Barrett M82A1 with custom ammunition. Environmental conditions included temperature, 28 degrees Fahrenheit, barometric pressure, 29.62 inches, and falling wind variable between 4 and 9 knots depending on position along the bullet flight path." One of the intelligence officers looked up sharply. "These modifications aren't consistent with any authorized equipment configurations in current military inventory." The modifications were field-expedient adaptations utilizing available resources to meet mission requirements, Morgan replied, using the standard phrasing that provided operational flexibility without admitting to unauthorized equipment alterations. Harrison's slight smile suggested appreciation for the diplomatic response. "And the ballistic calculation methodology. We utilized specialized calculation methodologies incorporating Coriolis effect, Earth curvature, atmospheric refraction, and barometric pressure gradient variations across the bullet flight path." Harrison nodded, seemingly satisfied with the carefully framed explanation. After several more questions focusing on technical aspects of the operation, he turned to the intelligence officers. "I'll need a moment alone with Sergeant Morgan. Classification remains at current level." Once the door sealed behind the departing officers, Harrison's demeanor shifted subtly. "Off the record now, Sergeant. What you accomplished today goes beyond impressive. It redefines what we consider possible in precision engagement." Reynolds leaned forward. "The question before us is how to document this achievement. Officially documenting a successful 3,000-plus meter engagement under combat conditions would force a reevaluation of doctrine, equipment, specifications, and training protocols across multiple agencies," Harrison explained, "some of which might not be desirable from a strategic perspective." Morgan understood immediately. "What are you suggesting, sir? The official record will document a successful elimination at approximately 1,800 meters, still impressive, but within established doctrinal parameters." Harrison's tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion, but a decision. The actual distance and specialized methodologies will remain classified at a level above standard operational documentation. Morgan absorbed this information without visible reaction. It wasn't the first time operational realities had been adjusted in official documentation, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. "Your achievement won't go unrecognized," Harrison assured her. "It will simply be acknowledged through different channels." Reynolds studied her with newfound intensity. "Sullivan tells me you possess an extraordinary natural talent for ballistic calculations, something beyond what can be taught or explained through conventional physics." Morgan tensed imperceptibly. Sullivan had shared more than she expected. "Master Sergeant Sullivan tends to exaggerate the capabilities of his former students," she replied carefully. Harrison's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened. "Your father possessed the same ability." The direct mention of her father caught Morgan off guard. She'd been prepared for questions about the operation, but not this personal connection. "My father died when I was 12, sir. I barely knew him." "But he knew you," Harrison countered. "And he recognized something in you that few would understand." He exchanged glances with Reynolds before continuing. "Sullivan wasn't just your instructor by coincidence, Morgan. Your father arranged it before his final deployment." The revelation sent a cold shock through Morgan's professional detachment. "That's not possible. Sullivan and I met during advanced sniper training years after my father's death." "Sullivan was watching you long before that," Harrison said quietly. "Your father made him promise to guide you if you chose a military path, to prepare you for what he believed you would become." Morgan maintained her composure through years of operational discipline, but internally her mind raced. If Harrison was telling the truth, her entire career trajectory had been shaped by forces she hadn't recognized. "Why tell me this now?" "Because what you accomplished today confirmed what your father predicted years ago," Harrison replied. "The shot you made wasn't just skill and technology. It was something else. Something we've been studying for decades through classified programs." Reynolds interjected, his tone measured. "We call it the sight, an intuitive understanding of external ballistics that transcends conventional calculation capabilities. The ability to sense environmental factors that instruments can't even detect." Morgan had heard whispers of such concepts throughout her career, but had dismissed them as military mythology rather than operational reality. "That sounds more like mysticism than tactical capability," she responded skeptically. "Your father was the most pragmatic operator I ever knew," Harrison countered. "He wouldn't have embraced the concept without evidence." He paused, studying her reaction carefully. "Evidence you'll find in the locker at Bagram." Morgan realized they knew about Sullivan's key and the locker's contents. The level of coordination suggested this moment had been orchestrated long before today's operation. "Why keep this from me until now?" "Your father's explicit instructions," Harrison explained. "He believed premature exposure to these concepts might influence your natural development. He wanted you to discover your capabilities without the burden of expectation." Morgan processed this information, maintaining her professional expression despite the internal turmoil. Her entire understanding of her career and possibly her own capabilities was being fundamentally challenged. "This conversation has veered significantly from an operational debrief, sir." Harrison nodded, acknowledging the point. "You're right. Let's conclude the official portion." He reactivated the recording equipment as the intelligence officers returned. "For the record, Operation Silent Precision is officially classified as a successful counter-sniper operation resulting in the elimination of a high-value target at a range of 1,800 meters. The remainder of the debrief proceeded according to standard protocols, focusing on tactical aspects of the operation. Throughout, Morgan maintained her professional demeanor, but her thoughts continued circling back to Harrison's revelations and what awaited her in the locker at Bagram. After the debrief concluded, Harrison asked Morgan to remain behind. Once they were alone again, he unfolded a map on the table between them. Volkov's elimination creates both opportunity and vacuum. He began without preamble. Intelligence suggests his Siberia program had expanded beyond Afghanistan, with training facilities in at least 3 additional locations globally. He indicated a location in northern Kazakhstan. This facility represents the technical heart of his operation. The instructors and trainees you encountered here were using equipment and methodologies developed there. Morgan studied the location, professional interest temporarily overriding her personal questions. What's the objective? Confirm the facility's actual purpose and determine whether Volkov's prototype technologies warrant recovery or elimination. Harrison's expression remained neutral, but his eyes conveyed the operation's significance. Given your first-hand experience with his methodologies and equipment, you're uniquely qualified for this assessment. Timeline: 72 hours for mission preparation. You'll rendezvous with a specialized team already positioning near the objective. Harrison paused before adding, Sullivan was originally slated to lead this operation, but his injury necessitates reassignment. His recommendation was for you to assume operational lead. Morgan maintained her professional composure despite her surprise. Leading a specialized intelligence operation represented a significant step beyond her previous assignments. I'll need complete briefing materials on the facility and surrounding area, she said, defaulting to operational planning rather than questioning the assignment, and clarification on mission parameters. Full mission briefing will commence tomorrow at 0800, Harrison confirmed. For now, I suggest you take some time to process today's events, and perhaps visit Bagram to check on Sullivan. As Morgan left the command center, she found Lieutenant Torres waiting outside. Transport to Bagram leaves in 30 minutes, Torres informed her. I've arranged priority seating if you're interested. Morgan studied Torres with renewed suspicion. You seem remarkably well informed about my plans. Torres smiled slightly. Let's just say I'm more involved in this operation than my rank might suggest. Sullivan isn't the only one who's been watching your development, Sergeant Morgan. The transport helicopter carried Morgan toward Bagram Air Base as darkness fell over the mountains. Alone with her thoughts, she found herself reevaluating her entire military career through the new lens Harrison had provided. Had her rapid advancement through specialized programs truly been due to demonstrated skill, or had unseen hands guided her path from the beginning? More disturbing was the suggestion that she possessed capabilities beyond normal human parameters. Morgan had always attributed her success to rigorous training discipline and natural talent refined through thousands of hours of practice. The concept of some inherent perceptual ability, this so-called sight, challenged her understanding of her own achievements. Upon reaching Bagram, Morgan's first priority was visiting Sullivan in the medical center. She found him in a private room, his leg elevated and heavily bandaged, but his color significantly improved. They tell me you're shipping out to Kazakhstan, Sullivan said without preamble when she entered. Harrison didn't waste any time implementing the contingency plan. Morgan closed the door to ensure privacy. You knew about this assignment before our Afghanistan operation. It wasn't a question, but Sullivan nodded confirmation anyway. The Kazakhstan facility has been a priority intelligence target for months. Your involvement was always a possibility. And your injury, convenient timing for the transition of operational lead. Sullivan's expression remained carefully neutral. Sometimes the battlefield creates its own opportunities. The non-answer was answer enough. Morgan pulled the brass key from her pocket, holding it up. Tell me about this. Sullivan's expression softened slightly. Your father left those items in my care before his final deployment. Things he wanted you to have when the time was right. And you decided today was that time. The shot you made, 3,247 meters under combat conditions, that wasn't just skill and technology. Sullivan's voice took on an unusual intensity. That was something your father recognized in you before anyone else. Harrison mentioned something called the sight, Morgan said, watching Sullivan's reaction carefully. Sullivan nodded slowly. Your father was the first to document it systematically. The ability to perceive and integrate environmental factors affecting ballistics in ways that transcend conventional measurement and calculation. That sounds like mysticism, not science. Your father was a scientist before he was a soldier, Sullivan countered. His background in theoretical physics gave him insights others missed. He recognized that certain operators seemed able to make shots that defied mathematical probability not just once through luck, but consistently. Morgan remembered her father's study filled with books on quantum physics and consciousness, dismissed by her adolescent self as boring academic interests. And he believed I had this ability. He knew you did, Sullivan corrected, even before you'd ever fired a rifle. He saw how you could track moving objects, predicting their paths with uncanny accuracy. How you intuitively understood complex systems without formal training. Sullivan shifted position, wincing slightly as the movement disturbed his wounded leg. The locker contains his research observations and theories. Things too dangerous to leave in conventional channels. Dangerous how? Sullivan's expression darkened. Because certain organizations, both within our government and outside it, have been attempting to identify and weaponize people with these abilities for decades. Volkov's Siberia program isn't just about creating elite snipers, it's about finding and exploiting people with natural talents like yours. The implication sent a chill through Morgan's professional detachment. You're saying I've been watched my entire career. Protected? Sullivan corrected. Your father anticipated the interest your abilities would generate. He established a network of trusted individuals to guide your development while keeping you off certain radar screens, including you. Sullivan nodded. I made a promise to your father. The day before his final mission, he asked me to watch over you if something happened to him, to guide you if you chose a military path. Why keep this from me for so long? Morgan demanded, the careful control she maintained in operational settings finally fraying at the edges. Your father's explicit instructions. He believed premature awareness might lead you to doubt your own abilities, or worse, begin to rely on something you didn't fully understand. Sullivan's gaze was steady. He wanted you to develop naturally to earn every advancement through demonstrated skill rather than special treatment. Morgan struggled to reconcile this new narrative with her understanding of her life and career. And the Kazakhstan mission, is that connected to this ability? The facility there isn't just developing advanced sniper systems. Intelligence suggests they're specifically selecting and training operators who demonstrate these enhanced perceptual abilities. Your exposure to Volkov's methodology makes you uniquely qualified to identify these aspects of the operation. Morgan found herself reevaluating everything through this new lens. I need time to process this. The mission briefing isn't until 0800 tomorrow, Sullivan reminded her. You have time to examine your father's materials first. Morgan nodded, rising to leave. Sullivan caught her hand, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. Your father would be proud of the operator you've become, Morgan. Not because of any natural ability, but because of how you've applied yourself to something larger than personal achievement. The storage facility was quiet, most personnel having retired for the evening. Morgan found the locker corresponding to the number on the key tag, hesitating briefly before inserting the weathered brass key. It turned smoothly, despite its apparent age, revealing a metal container sealed with environmental protection materials. Inside, carefully preserved in waterproof packaging, she found several journals bound in weathered leather technical diagrams of specialized equipment, modifications, and a smaller box containing what appeared to be a custom-designed targeting system unlike any standard military issue. At the very top lay a sealed envelope bearing her name in handwriting she recognized instantly, despite the years since she'd last seen it. Morgan traced her finger over her name written in her father's distinctive script. With unexpected hesitation, she broke the seal and unfolded the pages within. My dearest Alexandra, if you're reading this, then you've demonstrated the abilities I first recognized when you were just a child. Abilities I've spent years studying and documenting. What some call the sight is neither mysticism nor supernatural, but rather a cognitive capacity that science has yet to fully understand. You possess an extraordinary neurological integration of spatial awareness, atmospheric sensing, and predictive calculation that allows you to perceive and process ballistic variables in ways that transcend conventional measurement capabilities. In simpler terms, you can feel what others can only calculate and sense what instruments can only approximate. I've documented my research in these journals along with my observations of others who demonstrated similar capabilities. My hope was always to understand these abilities scientifically, rather than allowing them to be mythologized or exploited by those with less ethical intentions. And you must understand that others have been watching for people like you. The military values such talents for obvious reasons, but certain programs would seek to develop these abilities through means I consider unethical and potentially dangerous. I arranged protection for you through a network of trusted colleagues who understand both the potential and the risks. James Sullivan is chief among them, a man whose judgment and integrity I trust implicitly. He has watched over you as I would have guiding, rather than controlling your development. The targeting system included here represents my attempt to augment natural perceptual abilities with technology designed specifically for operators with enhanced spatial cognitive integration. Use it if you wish, but remember that the technology only amplifies what already exists within you. Whatever path you choose, know that these abilities come with responsibility. What you can perceive and accomplish will always exceed what can be officially acknowledged or documented. That burden of knowing falls to those rare individuals who operate beyond conventional parameters. I have always believed that abilities like yours exist not to create weapons, but to protect those who cannot protect themselves. That distinction matters more than you may realize now. With all my love and the deepest pride in the woman you've become. Your father. Morgan sat motionless after finishing the letter, its implications rippling through her understanding of herself and her place in the world. The journals beside her represented years of scientific observation and analysis, her father's attempt to understand abilities that defied conventional explanation. She opened the first journal, finding meticulous documentation of operators who had demonstrated extraordinary capabilities, their shots analyzed through both conventional ballistics and what her father termed integrated perceptual frameworks. His scientific background was evident in the rigorous methodology, each observation accompanied by detailed analysis that sought natural explanations for seemingly impossible achievements. Her father had been no mystic searching for supernatural powers, but a scientist trying to understand human potential that exceeded established parameters. That approach resonated with Morgan's own pragmatic nature, offering a framework that neither dismissed her experiences nor mythologized them. The targeting system, when she examined it, proved to be an ingenious integration of advanced technology with human perceptual capabilities designed to augment rather than replace the operator's natural abilities. Its specifications far exceeded anything in current military inventory, incorporating principles that conventional weapons development had yet to explore. As dawn approached, Morgan carefully resealed the container, leaving the journals and targeting system secure until she could properly examine them. The letter she kept, folding it carefully into an inner pocket where the brass compass had rested for years. The mission to Kazakhstan now took on additional dimensions beyond the elimination of Volkov's program. If the facility truly was selecting and training operators with enhanced perceptual abilities, the implications extended far beyond conventional military concerns. At 800 hours, Morgan reported to the mission briefing with renewed focus and determination. The specialized team awaiting her at the Kazakhstan border would need clear leadership and strategic guidance. Whatever personal revelations had emerged from her father's materials, the mission remained the priority, a principle both her father and Sullivan had instilled in her throughout her development. As she entered the briefing room, Morgan touched the letter in her pocket, alongside the compass that had guided her throughout her career. Her father had anticipated this moment years ago, preparing her for responsibilities that extended far beyond conventional operational parameters. The extraordinary shot, at 3,200 feet, had opened a door to understanding that transcended military doctrine, revealing capabilities that existed in the shadows between science and myth. That legacy, more than any official recognition, would guide her path forward into uncertain territories where conventional limitations no longer applied. For operators like Morgan, the true measure of achievement had never been official documentation or public recognition, but the impact of actions that changed the course of events from the shadows. In that space between official narratives and operational realities, she would continue the work her father had begun, understanding and applying extraordinary human potential in service to principles greater than personal achievement or organizational advantage. The Kazakhstan mission awaited its challenges, now illuminated by a deeper understanding of both her own capabilities and the forces that sought to exploit similar talents in others. Whatever revelations remained in her father's journals would guide her approach to an operation that now carried personal as well as strategic significance. The shot that had made history would never appear in official military records, but its impact would ripple through specialized communities and reshape understanding of what was possible in precision engagement. That hidden legacy represented the true nature of elite operations achievements that changed the world without ever appearing in its official narratives.